It's our pleasure to have Ivy present today on some of her work or thinking relative to project management and change management. And the origin of this goes back maybe 4 or 5 weeks ago to some comments she made in an earlier session that kind of got my interest going, that we really haven't spent a lot of time talking about the overlap and how both disciplines can actually benefit each other. So with that, let me go ahead and turn it over to Ivy for further introduction of her background.
Thank you, Dr. Ross. Thanks, Dr. Ross and Reg, for having me today. My name is Ivy Lewis. I have spent my entire career in the automotive industry in project management related role. And last year, I started my own consulting service for project management consulting and coaching. So I offer two types of service. One is I offer coaching for project managers to help them with their skill sets, and then I offer organizations consulting service to help them achieve operational excellence. So with that, a lot of my background are in project management. I was involved in a few strategy project and change management. So I look forward to be here today, share with you guys my knowledge about project management and open discussions regarding how they interact with each other. Okay, Dr. Ross, can we start or we should wait a little longer?
You can go ahead and start.
Okay, thank you. Since it's hard for me to see the participant list, I think I'll skip the roundtable introduction today. We have a lot of content I prepared today. I'll give a very short presentation, share with you my learnings and research about how project management and change management compare to each other. And then we're gonna introduce one short example and kick off a round of discussion, talk about how does change management and project management interact. And then we have another example prepared to discuss how do we measure success when it comes to change management and project management. So after that, if time allows, I have a real life case that's submitted by one of the people in my network for us to open discussion, talk about what are the best practice in this type of change project to lead to success. In the end, I'd like to have a roundtable feedback and we'll wrap up today's session. So with that being said, I'll start my quick presentation. If I go through too fast, please feel free to stop me and ask me to slow down. So we'll start with this. You guys probably very familiar with this picture. It's from the ProSci model. Generally in a change project, there is a current state and transition state and future state. And in this process, project management and change management quite often happen in parallel. While project management is supporting the technical side of the project, change management is supporting the people side of the project. So this is a view from the high level, and we're going to compare them side by side a little deeper. So looking at the definition, comparing on the left, change management, and on the right, project management, I highlight some of the keywords. In change management, it's about applying process and tools to manage people of the change in a current state to a future state that be able to achieve the desired result for the change. While on project management side, the definition is really applying knowledge, skills, tools, and techniques to activities to meet the requirements. If you look at the goals of different aspects, change management is focusing on to ensure the impact employees embrace, adopt, and use the solution, while project management is really ensure the solution is being designed, developed, and delivered. And the focus of different type of project on the change side is really focusing on the employees that are being impacted by this change. While on project management side, the focus is on the tasks and activities. And some other things related to them, for example, the process. According to, again, ProSci, change management has three phases: preparing, managing, and reinforcing. And as you guys know, in PMBOK, there are 5 steps of project management from initiating to closing. So in the process side, it's operate differently. While you look at some of the tools and documentations come out of the change management versus project management, you see on the left are the documents you see in a change management type of project, will be communication plan, sponsor roadmaps, training plans, reinforcement management. While on a project, you normally see project charter, business case, Gantt chart, budget estimation. And if you look at the people involved, change management often have the project sponsor as executives and senior leaders in the company. Quite often, HR will play a role in change management, and there will be a change manager. Versus on project management side, there's a project sponsor who fund and approve the project. There's a project manager leading the project, and there's a project team actually carry out the work. So after put these side by side, I also want to look at how the decision making happen in an organization. So I put this org chart as an example, a quite simple org structure. The company star on the top, the green box is the CEO, and the next tier is the HR director, VP engineering, and VP project management. So that's basically the executive team. And one layer down would be the managers and directors, the next level of the management team. And after that, as you see in the blue boxes, those are actually the employees and the doers. So you would see the engineers, project managers, salesperson there. So when you talk about a project decision, people are actually involved and be able to actually participate. You will see normally people in this red box being involved. Often it's the engineer who work on the project, the project manager, the salesperson who sell the project, and their one level up management team involved in decision making and operation. And now normally the next level of the executive would be the steering committee. However, it depends on the size of the project, size of organization, and the importance of the project. Sometimes the CEO and the next level up in the organization will be involved, but that's not every time the case. However, if you look at change management in general, in the gray box are the top tiers of the company's executives. Those are the people who normally sponsor and involve in decision making of the change management. So the point here is the difference between decision maker group of project management, change management is that project management tend to focus on the operational side of the company, while change management stakeholder is normally at the top tier of the organization. So really the goal today for the discussions is about what is really the relationship between change management and project management. Whether it's the scenario one, they're in this together, they're very interconnected, or it's a scenario two, they're fairly independent within one project. You meaning that you could have a successful project with change management doing well, but project management is not doing well, or vice versa. So I want you guys to keep this question in mind, and we're gonna, starting from here, dive into the examples I'll share with you, and we're gonna kick off a round of specific discussions around the examples. So with that being said, let's start example number one. Thank you, Gary, for your awesome presentation last time, and you inspired me to follow up on the COVID-19 example. So I decided to choose the New York State Corona case as a example project. So Governor Andrew Cuomo is the New York State governor. He is the project manager and the change manager in this case. And the example is about how he project managed and change managed the COVID-19 status in New York. So heads up, everyone, by the end of description of the example, the discussion topic will be how does project management and change management interact with each other in this case. So I'm going to talk through this example quickly, share with you some facts. On the project management side, Governor Andrew Cuomo, here's what he did. As you guys probably know, early March, New York State was hit quite heavily by COVID-19. So Governor Andrew Cuomo jumped on it and take the project manager and change manager hat at once. He started to have daily briefings at 11 a.m. every day, very consistent. And his briefing always open with the same picture as you see here as his first slide, showing this is day 109 for the COVID case. The other number is about the protest. And his briefing have the same structure. He opened up with the briefings, he shared the numbers and facts, and then he dive into the motivational speech, and then he wrap up with Q&A. He has very consistent, stacked data, as you see in the chart on the right, and he tracked the progression of the data. And then every day in the briefing, he shared the same KPIs, which are the first chart on right is the daily new cases, and then is the total hospitalization, and then numbers of lives lost. He report on those KPIs, show the progression of them every day in the briefing. So that's what he did on the project management side every day. On the change management side, there was a topic about reopen the economy. And instead of him being the governor, being the change manager, address his opinion as faced by data. And instead of doing that, what he did is first he put the status quo in front of his stakeholders, which are New York State people. And he addressed there are two theories. One is immediately open economy, another one is faced by data. Then what he did is that he shared the number of new cases, the trend curve, and the data of the other states, such as Arizona and Florida, while they took the path of immediately reopen the economy. And then he went back to the New York State curve, the KPI chart that he reported every day, to remind everybody New York has climbed the mountain, and he started getting to triggering people's emotion. After that, he addressed New York is tough, smart. He got into the motivational, emotional words. In the end, he reminded everybody that they all have a role and responsibility to play in this. By the end of his showing the facts, comparison data, and address the motivational speech, involve everyone's responsibility, it seems natural to come to the conclusion of his suggestion that New York should reopen faced by data. So with comparing to his activities of project management and change management, let's look at what's the project outcome as of the data last weekend. So on the project performance side, this is the curve I pulled last weekend. This is the New York's COVID-19 case curve. As you see, the project performance is going well. The curve has ramped down significantly. On the change management side, let's see what people say about Governor Cuomo's activity. On Wall Street Journal, they said his job performance has soaring since March. 85% of voters surveyed really approve of what he did with the crisis. On NPR.org, they also said he's getting raved reviews. He's getting buy-in from his people, from his party, and even people from the other party. And then people are very impressed. The words you see are impressed how he deal with the crisis with this project. And we're not talking about any politics related topics here, but I want to present to you how people receive his activities. So now, with that being said, let's start a first round of discussion. I want to give the question to you guys, ask you, based on the examples we shared, on the facts we have heard, what do you think that Governor Cuomo, how did he leverage project management and change management to manage his project? And how did you see project management and change management interact with each other in this specific case? Please discuss what you've seen in this case. Share with us of your experience as well. Anyone who want to start?
Hi, Ivy, it's Gary.
Hey, Gary.
One thing I noticed, thank you for this. This is very interesting because in British Columbia, for example, we actually have the our BC medical officer at the podium, and the premier is kind of behind her, kind of supporting her, and she always speaks first, not him. So I find it interesting that the governor is actually taking on both roles. So that's just a distinction that I've been making.
Great point, Gary. Thank you for sharing that observation. Anybody else wants to comment on this?
Yeah, from my perspective, I think the pieces that he did in terms of a PM were more appealing those who would take information in a data or a technical sense. So the appeal were to those kind of stakeholders, and also that helped with his project team, whoever are his frontline workers or his office bearers or all the community that really needs to do the job, that is more relevant to them. Then he then moved on to, and wearing his change management hat, he needed to get the buy-in from the entire population, and then he pulled at the emotional string. He gave very bits of data, and then the comparativeness, always triggers a sense of achievement, a sense of solidarity, or a sense of we are doing the right thing. So pulling at that versus, and as you started off by saying, that it is tool versus people.
Thank you.
And a quick comment on what Gary just mentioned. I don't know US politics and the system much, but is it possible because the way the US provinces or cities are supposed to undertake this is their own activity versus in Canada where it might be funded by the higher municipal or levels of organization? So is that why the face becomes important, where in one place it is the just the governor, and the other place it's one higher or two higher?
Hello, this is Arlene.
Hi, Arlene.
I just want to kind of interject a little bit here. First, thank you for the presentation because it made it very clear the roles, or at least the tasks that happen. My first view of this is Governor Cuomo handled the role as you would expect a leader to handle the role, highlighting what needed to be highlighted about the project, and also from a change management perspective, understanding his audience and understanding where they were in needing to know things and what they needed to know in order to motivate them to actually act. And the difference, just to respond to the last thing, the difference between him and the way he's leading this is starkly represented by the way President Trump is doing it. Now, I don't want to get political, but there's a stark difference between the two behaviors, and you can see the reaction to both and the effectiveness of each. But the point is, I think from my perspective as a change practitioner, consultant, my view would be to be helping Governor Cuomo ensure the message he was fashioning would exactly do this. Yes, the project is still going on. And also, Gary, just to respond to what you were saying, he would, any questions that required detailed information, he referred to an expert on. So he never responded for the expert. He spoke generally about the situation, and then he had every one of his experts there. From a perspective of change management, it was totally integrated. And that kind of is my view of change management, because a lot of it, from my experience, is around implementing effective technology. If you don't have two sides, and if the user is not responding to the new system will not be effective no matter how well it's implemented. So that relationship, which is what do you do with it? How are you doing it? Is this supporting the way you do it? Oh, by the way, you won't have to do this difficult thing anymore because we'll now give you these capabilities. That's the change management, project management side of it. We have to work really close together.
Yeah.
Okay. I talk a lot, so I'm going to stop. But
Thank you. That's good input. Thank you.
I think it's interesting because he did such a good job. The whole state, was at a point where if he hadn't managed it the way he was, it could have turned into complete chaos. And you see other states where the governors have the same amount of information, and they may be making the same types of decisions, but they're not communicating it and they're not adding the change management piece. So they're managing the project, right? But it's not working because people aren't complying with their edicts. And so, in a case like this, without being able to get the people to understand why they're doing what they're doing and getting them onto your side, you're not going to be successful no matter how well you manage that project, no matter how much information you impart without that change management piece.
So what you share, thank you. What you shared actually has a good point. Is you're saying he's not just managing the project. His ultimate goal is actually the change management. So to get people buy in with his result outcome of the project. So that's just one relationship and how project management, change management interact. What do you guys feel that how did he leverage the project management side to build a foundation for his success to change management? Can one of you comment a little bit more on that?
Yeah, I can do that. In fact, I can tie in probably my presentation last week because when I see the flatten the curve data, which is project data here, that's very much on the complicated side, complicated to me because you are trying to drive a certain sort of result that you want to get here. So I'm all for being target, and trying to get to where you want to be. At the same time, too, smart enough to see that trying to influence people is on the complex domain. So this is why the last slide that you showed, Ivy, which is really about motivation of people here, he realizes he cannot force people to behave this way. So he's creating those sort of like, this is how you should be, how the relationships, interactions that we want here. And in many cases, it's cross my fingers and I hope that you kind of get on there so we can flatten the curve. So I kind of like the two together.
Thank you, Gary. Thanks for sharing that. That was really good. Anybody else has any input regarding to this case? Okay, how about let's look at a different example. Thanks everyone for your comments. So this is another really short example. It's a real life example happened last few years. I didn't get approval to share the company name, but I'm going to share with you all the content and the outcome. So this organization went through an org change project. They follow the ADKAR model. And the difference in this example is that they have a change manager and a project manager. Those are two separate roles in this example, versus the last one, Governor Cuomo wear both hats himself. And a little heads up, by the end of the example, we're going to discuss how do we really measure success in a case like this, and whether you guys think this project is successful. So here is the change. This organization was originally in a silo structure, as you see on the green picture on the left, and they want to transform to a matrix organizational structure, as you see on the right. So timeline is 12 months. The project lead is, interestingly, one engineering manager, one of the guy on top of the silo on the left org chart. He is the project manager in this project. And HR manager is the change manager. They are working closely together on this project. Stakeholders are exactly you see in this red box, the top tier of the organization, the entire executive management team. And before they start the project, they did took ADKAR change management training for the entire executive team only. So let's look at what they did. On the project management side, first thing happened is they identified 5 working groups, 5 areas that they need to dive in and work on. So the project manager and the change manager together are leading all those working groups. And the project manager runs every single meeting. He documents all the meeting minutes himself, and he has very strict configuration management. Whom in the company can see the minutes, whom cannot, is very strictly managed. And he runs very structured meetings. And there are weekly project team meetings, and weekly working group meetings, and weekly report to stakeholders. So those are the activities on the project management side in this project. Well, on the change management side, the change manager manages all the communications. So first thing is project manager and the change manager sit down after every single meeting to review the meeting minutes prior to publish them. And then the communication people to all the general people, employee, are managed in the way that there is a monthly drafted email from the change manager distribute to all the executive members to distribute to their teams. So the communication are identical. How they manage resistance is that the project manager and the change manager select specific group of employees to participate in employee survey every quarter. So the survey are showing very consistently progressing positive results. How they manage feedback is that the organization mission statement has a trust culture. So they said, because we have a trust culture, we only address inputs, feedbacks in person to the executive team. Not, the anonymous feedbacks will not be addressed. So that's everything happened during the project. Let's take a look at the outcome. So first thing happened is the new organization structure announced exactly 1 year later, on time. And the organization has successfully transformed to a metrics structure. And the project documentation are done very well. There are lots of reports generated, and the project reports are very well liked by all the stakeholders. However, the turnover rate went from average 5% for the past 5 years to 20% in 1 year. And a lot of employees are unhappy at their jobs. So manager receives requests for career development conversations, change of departments type of discussions 2 to 3 times a week after the new organization structure has been announced. So now the question for you guys is, what do you think? Is this a successful project? How do we measure project management success and change management success in a case like this?
As a project, it is successful for sure because it achieved everything that it set out to achieve according to its scope and its framework. As a change, I guess it did not, because then the results are showing that there is attrition, there is conversation which indicates towards some sort of a dissatisfaction with the present situation. So yeah.
I agree with that perspective. I would also say that I would need to understand more about what they really wanted the outcome to be, because in some environments, when a change is occurring of this type, which really does restructure how people interact, they generally understand they will lose people that don't want to participate in that environment or can't find their footing. And they also have people who literally feel devalued because the structure they were in was how they perceive their value. So you have those kind of resistant activities. So it would really depend on if the leadership felt that, in fact, they were running more effectively with this new outcome, the way the system is now, the way the organization is now set up, and if the results, in fact, were achieving the results they wanted.
Great point. Just let me ask a question. I'm intrigued. How do you measure resistant, right? That's such a soft thing. How do you measure like a resistant, whether it's successful or not?
Yeah.
Well, for one thing, you're going to get resistance. So you never go to a situation not knowing that somebody is going to not appreciate it, dislike it, be afraid of it, whatever their personal reaction might be. But what normally happens is you really have to get down into the organization and understand how people will adapt to this. How will this change the way I do things? And how do I tell people whether or not it's working for me? So there has to be feedback mechanisms that allow some real-time understanding of whether something is working or not. Mm-hmm. They can't just complain. They actually have to say, this would be better. So the time from a change management perspective is helping them communicate effectively. One, assumption is we're going to do this, we're going to succeed. Second, you're actively involved and we need you. Please help us understand how to fix things so it does improve. And then you also remind them of why it's better than it was. So that also means that you've spent time understanding how it was before and what problems they were actually having. So that you can remind them these things won't happen anymore. Hopefully, you're saying we're getting rid of these issues that you were dealing with, and things will work better. So, and that's an ongoing conversation, and leadership at all levels has to be in sync with that.
I
It will
think,
get feedback at all levels.
I think another issue that we're starting to talk about here is that the timeline for the project is different than the timeline for the change. You could say that the project has completed because the new organization is structured, is in place, but you're only in the maintenance phase for the change itself. And if you're talking about success, the issue of turnover and career development, it might be a little early to declare whether that's a failure or success because you're still in maintenance to figure out how the organization is working in the matrix.
Absolutely. And I think that links in with what Arlene was saying, and it depends what you're trying to achieve in the organization. Because if you go from left to right, from a typical hierarchical silo to a matrix, you're going to disrupt just about every power system in the organization. And that may have been part of the reason. So you're going to have a lot of unhappy people. And so it's not unusual to see really a large number of people who won't put up with that and leave. But that may be part of the agenda. So it comes back to what's the purpose for the change? And if it is about changing power bases and other things, then to what extent are you going to manage that over a time scale? Because 1 year, you're never going to manage it.
Yeah. If the question is how do you measure this, if you go look back at the New York example here, they measured with hard data and numbers on the project management. But I noticed that what you showed for the change management were actually stories, were actually opinions. So in some respects here, it's very difficult to measure hard numbers on change management. And this kind of goes back to this thing I talked about last week, is about you really don't measure, but you monitor. And what you can monitor over time is more stories like this, fewer stories like that. So that's what I think I tie in with what Ross, Arlene, and Reg are saying here is you have to monitor that time over time to just kind of see how the nature of those stories are shifting. It does bother me when you said in the first slide that anonymous sort of comments were ignored and only the positives. So if I was a board of director member, I'd be going like, I'm getting filtered data here. What's really happening down below? Oh, look at this. People are leaving unhappy here. We're not getting the real picture of what's happening.
Yeah, thank you, Gary. That's a good point, but that's what happened in this case. I think that leads to a lot of the resistance down the road. Sorry, Arlene, you were going to share something.
Well, the only thing I was going to go back to what Reg was saying, even in the structure you're showing there, there's a radical difference even in the level of interaction and reporting that's created there, which is behavioral and not going to be measurable really through surveys or anything in a valid way, because people will not take time out of what they have to do to respond to that. They're going to be trying to understand how to be successful here. So the bigger thing comes, do they understand how they can be successful now? Is it clear to people my career path, what my actual job is, what I'll be evaluated on in this new structure? Because that's my fear. And that's I'm going to be resisting every fear that I will not continue to be successful. So the clearer that is, the more direct feedback, more honest feedback you'll get. And also you then look at, what are we actually accomplishing? Do we serve our customers well? Are we getting, are we providing the products we want better, quicker? These are the things that would show real measurement and improvement, and you won't see it immediately because you're going through a true transformation here. So that's an evolution over time.
Great point, Arlene. You mentioned one thing about fear, and also Gary talked about monitor the success on the change management side. So managing fear, managing resistance, and monitoring the success, would that be responsibility of a change manager, or is it responsibility of the entire stakeholder team in this case?
Can I make a comment about that? I'm not sure you can manage fear. It's the job of the senior management to remove fear.
It is the organization that helps work through some of that kind of thing. You look to leadership Well, what the advice I always give leadership, especially, is you need to be the credible source of information. Okay, so rumors cannot supersede you as the credible source of valid information. So there's a lot of, how are we going to structure this? What kind of conversations are you going to say before you do this to people? How are you going to work them through it so you have this transition handled? But the more important thing is you have to interact and communicate a lot through the entire transition, and also be willing to not be steadfast in your own solution as much as understanding we're evolving to a solution that gets us the best results. Our customers are happier. We create better products. We have determined better career paths for people, so we're retaining employees. These are the things that any transformation is trying to achieve. So you'd be measuring that.
Okay. Any other comments?
Let me ask a quick question here. For this organization, when did they declare that they were done? When the project was done, or when the HR felt that it was being implemented and accepted through the maintenance phase?
They had the project management was a year, and when the org structure announced, the change management wrapped up within the year after the new org structure announced. When the turnover started to slow down, back down to 10%, is when the change manager declared the transformation has completed.
You know how long after the project, the matrix was it? Actually, let me restate that. How long after the matrix was fully implemented, which was the 12-month mark, did the change manager or the HR side declare that the organization was stable? What was that second period?
Another 12 months.
Okay. So they ended up actually taking 2 years to do a 1-year project. The first year was primarily getting the project side in place. The second year was the maintenance on the change management side.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
This may be a language thing, but the comment about this is a project on the project management side, but in the change management, this is a program. The idea of program being it's always ongoing and it will always kind of be there. Did that language ever come up?
Not in this case.
I'd like to bring one other comment in. And I think you said it was the HR who were leading on the change management side. Is that correct?
Yes.
To what extent would that have an impact on the effectiveness of the change process if HR are seen as moving more from a neutral role to one of managing a change where there may be shifts of power, there may be feelings of all sorts of skill loss, career loss, and all sorts. And it always worries me when the change management side is run by HR. Was there any comment about that in the project or program?
From this project, yes, a lot of employees have naturally have the fear because HR is in the leading role of defining what who are their next new boss is after the new org structure has established. So I think that certainly caused a level of fear. There are some negative feedback from the employees regarding HR actually leading such a project, such an important project. But
that doesn't surprise me.
Yep, but no negative feedback from the executive team. From the executive team perspective, seems naturally HR would be in such a role of leading changes and communication.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't surprise me. I always remember when Fiat autos were seen as a disaster, and the late boss of Fiat, when he was asked how he brought the turnaround from what it was to what it became under him, and his comment was the first thing I had to do was remove fear. And part of that was not allowing HR to be involved in the change itself, but being part of the support process. And I think this is really, really an important part of change.
I would agree with that because generally speaking, HR represents operationally how things work, not necessarily how people feel, even though they get to talk to them that way. They expect that level of understanding from their immediate supervisor, let's say, or their immediate leadership. The interpretation of what the upper level says and what it actually means to me, I'm going to trust my immediate supervisor, hopefully, before I trust anybody else. So, hopefully you're in a situation where people would actually be honest about what they're concerned about, maybe not fearful of, but concerned about. And it would be addressed in a more real way at that level. It would never happen that way in HR. It's like you're talking to the cash register or, it's not the same relationship.
No, it's not. And I think the other side is HR very often, unfortunately, still seen as the policing function of organizations. So they're almost project-based in the way they operate. They have a project to recruit, they have a project for discipline and so forth. And so change management and HR, for me, is a bit of a dichotomy.
I agree with that. They also have to rebuild their own trust. Okay, they also have to prove that they will not be the police and that they will, in fact, help people become more successful. So they usually have to reprove their.
Looking at the success of the change management, also, you've got that quantitative. Well, we stopped losing, our people at a certain rate, but what people did you lose? Did you lose those key, like high performing people? Are you just retaining the people that are just going to do status quo and hate, looking for another job and are going to stay where they are until they're forced to make a decision? So just looking at the stability of our workforce isn't really telling you if you've been able to retain the people, that you really need to be successful, or whether or not this change is going to, succeed with what you core want to do, which is higher performance, right, and a better, stronger organization all together.
Yeah,
That's a good point.
Susan raises a good point because I've seen these organization shifts. I've also seen them pendulum swing back after 5 years because matrix doesn't work. So the new president comes in and they shift back into the vertical. But the point about what you make, Susan, is that nowhere does it show where the informal networks are. The kind of entangled stuff, the little kind of like cliques and silos where the knowledge actually is. Because that's what you really also examine here is the knowledge. Have they left as part of the people that are unhappy? Or are they sticking around, just hanging out here until they swing back into the vertical again?
Yes, restructuring is usually dealing with symptoms, not solving problems.
Yeah, I agree with you.
The other part of it is, you remember the story that the case study I was using was an example of this kind of change. And one of the main things that we had to deal with was we really had to understand what they were doing, how were they successful in their current environment, before we could even determine how we were going to measure success in the new environment. So if we didn't understand what was happening at the employee level, at the worker level, in the existing structure, there was no way that you were going to ever see anything that would clearly represent something you could validate as real fact. You would be seeing the effect of this radical change on their existence. But there's a lot of development that you do when you analyze the current environment to get people ready to transition. Mm-hmm. And if that hadn't happened, then you really are just slamming something new on people and going, okay, well, let's see what happens now.
Great point, Arlene. You point out that aspect. I think back on this case, It was merely a leadership decision and saying we're ready to make this org change. And that's the start point of the project or the program in this case. There was no front side of the prep work that you just mentioned. What are we trying to achieve and why are we doing this? None of these was really in building the project at all.
Ivy, is this company predominantly a project-based organisation?
Yes, it is.
Then that's your answer for why it went that way. It's managed as a project. It's not managed as a change management.
Yes, the company has deep knowledge related to projects. So that's why any of the managers being put on the spot, he's ready to execute this project right away.
Yeah, and that's when after they go through this and they actually then bring the change manager back in because everybody's screaming and going crazy. These are the things you find out. This was thrown upon us. We had no idea what was really going on. They never asked us what the real problems were. And here we are. I'm staying because I'm committed to my job or I like what I do or whatever, but a lot of disruption, a lot of problems because no one ever talked to us. They just said, here's what we're going to do now. So yeah, that's the extra work I usually get. It's fun that way because you get people screaming in your face all the time.
You're a masochist, Arlene.
It seems that way, doesn't it? But I think it's conditioning over time.
It seems natural we jump to this slide. All right. Oh, where is it? This slide right now. Sorry. We talked a little bit about it. I do want to open up for open discussion. Please share your experience. Like we had these two examples we discussed. One is project manager and change manager are the same person, right? Governor Andrew Cuomo, he's wearing the same hat. He's wearing both hats. Whereas the second case, there's a separate project manager and there's a separate change manager, regardless whether that should be HR or not. Is there matters when these two roles are combined or when these two roles are separate? Is there a specific environment that we should have separate roles on this project? Or is there a specific case that there may more sense to be combined? What's your thoughts and experience on this?
Usually a project means there's one specific thing that needs to change and they want, they're expecting a certain result. So from that perspective, that can be engaged, enclosed in itself. But in order to, and that's the implementation. So in order to actually effectively use that in the organization as a true implementation, communication is required. You really have to engage and involve people, and you have to help them understand what they'll do differently now that this is happening. And that's usually the biggest concern anyone has is what is changing about my life, really? Okay, do I do everything the way I did before? Am I reporting to the same people? Are we still producing the same product? Help me understand what is different now so I can be effective. And the more people feel like they're being effective, the easier it is. And the more valid feedback you get.
I also think that at the beginning of change, sometimes what happens is they don't listen to feedback from the people who are in the trenches. So here we are going to make this change. And here we're telling you what that change is going to be. And then we, as the people in the trenches are giving feedback and saying, hey, you know what, we've been in that position before. We've tried that before. I work in an organization that for a while we had a revolving door on senior leadership. So every 1.5 to 2 years, we would get a new set of management. They'd all come in and try and fix our organization, which was broken. And it got to the point where, we saw the same strategies repeated over and over again. And when we're trying to give them feedback, they're like, don't worry, this time it's going to work because nobody's done it the way I did. And they're not listening to, we're able to tell them where the pitfalls are and where things have remained broken. It's those hard things that people didn't want to try and hit. So I think sometimes, you know, when these plans happen, they make decisions at a high level and kind of write those in stone and say, hey, and they come to the people afterwards and say, this is what's going to happen. And they're not willing to reconsider that maybe they didn't have all the information they needed when they made that decision.
That's a good point. That does happen, at least in the example number 2, that was the case. The decision was made from top down and communicated cascade down, and there was no feedback loop for a chance to change that decision.
I would also like to just point out one additional thing about the examples, the differences in the example. The first example is crisis management, okay, which effectively changes the idea of what and the type of communication required. The second one is an organizational transformation, okay, which means there are some stable points there. You know, you're coming from something that was considered somewhat stable and you're changing to something else that's going to be somewhat stable. Governor Cuomo not dealing with that at all. He's dealing with complete unknown. I have no idea what's going to happen. That's what I'm telling you, what I do know. Okay, so he created the credible source of information. Okay, people listen to him all over the country every day because they didn't trust any other, you know, because for one, Dr. Fauci was not always available and they really did not trust other sources of information. Okay, and that is management. That's knowing your audience, understanding what the real needs are for information to them, and also making sure that you're enabled to tell them how to respond successfully. And he did that every day. Everything he said was, here's what I know, here's how we're handling that, here's what I need from you. Every day. Okay.
I'll challenge you on that. I don't think in change management terms there should be a difference. Because if management knew all the answers, then we wouldn't be having all the problems we're having in organizations. And yes, one is affecting people differently at the emotional level. But overall, I think it's the same principles. And it's about appropriate communication. It's about saying, I haven't got an answer. I need your help to help me make the decision. And if we're more open and honest in this way, then the impact that technology is having on organizations, the impact that legislation is having in our environmental terms, on the auto industry and others, there are no answers at the moment. There's lots of concerns and lots of problems. And it's being open and honest, as in the case of New York, I think is absolutely crucial, whether it's a pandemic or whether it's a traditional organizational change. And I think the days have gone where we can separate project management and change management. We're in open systems. Organizations are now open to their competitors. They cooperate with each other. The circular economy is requiring much more cooperation. And so to separate project and change management, I think, is a recipe for disaster.
Great input, Dr. Reg. If I think back, Governor Andrew Cuomo's case, from project management perspective, one thing I see what he did is that because it's unknown, people are in a very nervous stage. What he did, he used data, he speak to the fact, so he managed the project management side of the things to build trust and build his credibility. So later on, he could actually have credibility to do the change management when it comes to like the economy reopen topic successfully. So from project management perspective, that's what I see is that he used that activity to build a foundation for his change management.
And I would see that as he developed a change management strategy, a communication strategy to communicate the facts effectively to the audience so they would hear him and they would act. Okay, and from my perspective, that's the level you're involved with when you're doing change management, because you're still dealing with people. And that's the difference between crisis management, puts you in a situation where all norms are removed. Okay, so no policy is necessarily valid. No rule that we used to use is still there. I'm confused. I want to understand something. And that's the kind of communication you saw coming directly from Governor Cuomo. An organization change, we're doing this, okay? Everybody does it or you leave. Period, kind of, but we are taking you from what you understood as a solid structural situation and we're moving you into the unknown. Okay, so we're just saying nothing you understand is going to be the same, and we're the ones controlling that, and we're going to make you do this instead. Very different thing than, oh my God, my entire world is falling down around me. My parents are dying. People are in the hospital. What do I do? Very different kind of communication and need between the audience.
I would comment from the audience.
A
Go
quick
ahead.
question on that, on Andrew Cuomo versus your second case. The population, those who are receiving this, they are also in a different state of mind, right? Like they are also uncertain of everything, and they are willing to take Andrew Cuomo's perception of a standardized set delivery of information and message because they don't know where they are. Whereas on the other side, nothing is broken. Why are you trying to fix something? Right? So the approach is the readiness of the people are completely different on both the cases.
I agree.
That's a good point. But if I think about the audience, how they receive this, in the case of Governor Cuomo, like you said, people feel like, oh my God, what's happening? And this crisis dump on them. Versus from the org development example, the people said they didn't know that we're having this change. The first point they're communicated is also, we're doing this change. Oh my God, what's going to happen to my job? So I would argue there are certain similarity, not the same scale, but there's similarity in how the audience is receiving this, how they feel after this information is communicated to them.
I think this is the important point. It's the communication process. And it's okay in both cases to say you don't have an answer. You want help from those around you to help make that decision. And so that's why I see no difference. Yes, the emotional side and all that sort of stuff is different. So the content of the message is different. But the fact that you have to deliver that, and it's okay to say you haven't got the solution. And so if you're going into from one structure to another, then at the early stages, you say, well, look, the current structure is not working. I don't know what the best structure is. Now, what I want to do is work with you on what the options are as we see it. So I see it as the same. It's just most people don't do this in change management. They come up with their solution in from the boardroom and with some consultant, and then they say, now how are we going to make this work? And that's where I think it fails.
Yes, when it's done that way, it does fail almost every time.
Yeah, and that's what most change, in my experience, starts off as. And you have to say, hang on,
like
stop.
I said, that's where I get to come in because it did fail. Because it wasn't a good idea. And because they hadn't done the work that they had to do to actually effectively make a change. But hopefully we get to learn from that and then make a little more effective change. Not to say that, miracles happen, but you hope for a better result and more trust in the people and more involvement and effort on their part to make sure it works. But there's a whole different level of communication happening. Leadership is not coming down saying, here's what you're going to do and don't question me. Okay, that never works. It just never works.
So I come back to Ivy's question. I maintain that separation of project management and change management, those days are gone. We're in open systems, they're more complex. Relationships are such that support things are no longer support, they're now main part of the organization and so forth. So I can't think of a project which is not going to have an impact on the organization, and therefore the two need to be combined.
Traditionally, still there is the separation when you do a technology upgrade. So the project is clearly defined by when do you start and when the entire population is shifted onto the new system. And that's where it ends. But as Dr. Ross had pointed out, that, okay, then the maintenance phase of the change maybe comes back. But from a project's perspective, you have delivered and you are done.
I
From a pure
understand that.
traditional perspective of a pure project management, because and then the people side, the soft side kicks in, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, I'm currently tomorrow, they've got their final exam weeks. These are IT engineers on cloud computing engineering master's course. And what we teach them on that course, which they don't like at the beginning, now they love it, is even an update of a system or moving from local servers to the cloud and so forth. That in itself is actually quite a significant change management program. If you start to look at the bigger picture on who is actually affected and what the business case is for doing it and so forth. And that's why I keep struggling with even technology upgrades and things like this are still having an impact on the whole system because they're no longer a support function. They're now part of the main delivery of the business. And so I cannot see this separation. Maybe someone can help me.
Honestly, there is no separation. It was separated because people wanted to learn different things. Technical people are very good at implementing technical software changes and things like that. But to effectively get users to use them requires an understanding of what they do today. It's a tool, okay? So if it's a hammer and you're changing everything to screws, I now need to understand how a screwdriver works because the hammer is not going to be the right answer anymore. Okay, so that's directly going to affect my behavior. I'm going to pick up a different tool. I'm going to use it in a different way. But I need to understand that. And the question becomes, if a leader understands this is what a person is doing, then the question from their perspective is, if you're taking away the hammers and giving them screwdrivers, how long are you going to have them try to find another hammer because all they know how to do is bang something in, as opposed to teaching them how to use a screwdriver because now their job has changed. And that it's the implementation and then user adoption are two very different things. And a project can't be completed successfully without both because you never see the advantage of the change if people don't do things differently. If they really benefit from getting new software because they're trying to do what they always did, it's really not going to be an effective result.
Well, doesn't change management need to come in before the technical solution is completely defined? Because I found when engineers define how that solution is going to be deployed, you end up with something that's not user-friendly.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You absolutely.
And also, even a systems upgrades or changes.
Solutions are sold. Okay, they're sold complete, which is what makes people comfortable with selecting them. So their vision is, this is what we're going to be. No one's ever said, well, what are you today? Is that a good transition? Is there an easy transition? Is it going to be hard? How's it going to work for you? You know, where are you now? And can you get there easily? And is it more than just installing software and making sure the code works? And yeah, it is. I mean, I worked for IBM, so I spent a lot of years working with programmers and engineers and everything, helping them understand that, yes, this shines and sparkles and all of these bells and whistles are fabulous, but nobody does that, okay? So love your creativity, but in the user world, never going to happen. So we need things that are going to be more adaptable. This is how people actually do things. Let's improve on that. But it's a different kind of discussion. So you can't separate these things. They don't work that way. It's just, you know, there's been a lot of money in separate education.
So true, Eileen. I agree with what you said because if I think about, if you talk about project management, the first phase is actually project manager take the business case to the project sponsor, to the executive team to get the project buy-in, on board, approved, funded. Even though that's project manager's job, but he's actually doing the change management function to be able to have this project fully approved and funded. And then during the process, you guys talked a lot about communication, right? The process strategy. And that's an essential soft skill for project manager and change manager. So there are a lot of common ground between project management and change management. I think they quite complement each other in that case.
Yeah, I mean, the definition has always been if you want to bring in new software or any technology, no matter what it is, if it's not going to give you competitive advantage, then why are you doing it? Now that's getting more and more difficult today because it's nearly everybody's buying the same stuff. And so the only way you can get competitive advantage through technology is through the way your people use it. And this is why change management is an integral part. And right at the beginning, sit with the technology people together and say, hey, you guys understand how we can do this technically. Organizationally, this is the impact we've got to have. How are we going to bring this around together? And then the C-suite, who haven't got a clue what this conversation is about because that's not on their agenda, they don't understand technology, then you help them understand. And so this separation, for whatever reason it has been historically, those days I would suggest are long gone.
Anyone else want to share your experience and your feelings about this discussion so far?
My experience in the project as a project manager delivering on a technology transformation projects has been not always has there been a change manager assigned. So it has been part of the project scope to manage, how are we informing and how are we keeping our stakeholders, which is our, C-suite or, leaders informed and connected and engaged to motivate the other members, and also training so that that portion where we help them once we as a project team says that done date, delivered, hands off, and the next level of people are taking this over now. That's when the training and everything kind of continues to do what perhaps the change is doing or needs to do. But that's how it has been in my experience.
Thank you for sharing. Any other comments before we move on?
Let me add one more as I'm thinking about back to the Governor Cuomo's instance. We framed this discussion within the arena of project management and change management. But if you were to ask him, I don't think he would use those terms. He would use crisis management and communication strategies. In which case, is he just responding from a leadership or management perspective with what he normally does, or is he consciously using project management and change management techniques to augment what he might otherwise have done?
He is doing this because it needs to be done. He's not doing it based on any formal educational strategies of any kind. It's called, you are a leader. You're leading people who are in crisis and they need your attention. And you clearly understand what they're concerned about. And you also understand that you have to affect true change or at least stability in this scenario. So the communication is all about that. It's all about just knowing that it has to happen like this in order to be effective. And you don't learn that in school. You learn that by leadership. You learn that by experience. And that's what you see happening.
If that's the case, then what value does change management, project management have versus experience?
It has big value because not everybody has the experience. plain.
In which case, we just got lucky with Governor Cuomo.
No, he stood up. He stood up because no one else was. Okay. Also because he had the hot spot at the time. He rose to the occasion. Okay. That's all that is. And he did what was right.
But don't you think people who had change management and project management experience are consulting with him and giving him?
Oh, absolutely. Right. I would imagine he's getting advice and information from every source he possibly can to effectively do this. Okay, because the goal is to create an effect on a population. So yeah, I mean, what you see is the example of an effective leadership style. Okay, if we want to do it educationally, effective leadership style to engage and involve all the correct to actually get a population or a community or whatever you want to call it, but a group of people to respond in an effective way. And that's what he did every single day. And he did it every single day. Because
so, Ross, to your point, I viewed him as an executive sponsor. I didn't view him as a project manager or change manager. Because if you look at the results, if we use the Cuomo exercise, the results are abysmal, right? Lots of deaths and lots of other things. So I don't view him as either a project or change manager. I view him in my projects when I do the change management piece or project management piece, I have an executive sponsor and they articulate what the teams have done and filter it. But I don't view that they did the work. They have, subject matter experts that feed them the data. And so at the end of the project, did we change successfully? Did the project meet its objectives? And where were the hiccups to learn from it? So I think this is still to be learned from. But if you looked at the results were abysmal. The deaths were high. If we look at all of that, if you take it as a project, not politics, but just a project, there were a lot of things that were done incorrectly. So, when I've been in projects, you have milestones and you check, what did we do? What worked, what didn't work? What do we need to reformat or eliminate altogether? So I view him as an executive sponsor with subject matter experts feeding him the data.
Okay, Ivy, we got about 15 minutes on the clock if you want to move forward.
Yeah, I think it's a good point we move forward. Thanks for the discussion, everyone. This is actually, I'm on the board of a local PMI chapter. One of the guys from the chapter raised this case asking for change management help. So I thought it's a perfect opportunity to bring in here to open discuss. He works for a tier 1 large supplier in automotive industry. They produce driveline components. And the company is currently in the middle of an org change project. So what happening in his department is that it's a manufacturing department. They receive hundreds of change requests a week, and they have a group of project managers. They're very overloaded, and the management are very occupied in the org change project and worry about what their next role is. So they're ignoring the issue. They're only asking the project manager to fix the change requests. So the project manager started to use their own templates, their own methods, their own shortcuts to be able to attack the problems in time. A lot of people are burned out. They're not happy. So that's the current state. And what the manager wants is that everyone become happy, change requests can be handled timely, and starting to build a systematic process and approach to resolve this change requests and have proper documentation. So in that case is when Aaron, he is the guy submitted this case, he was asked to help. His background is a project manager. He assessed the current state. What he did is he proposed to the group of project managers and the management, he think a project management office would be the right solution to standardize the process, tools, and templates for this manufacturing department for everyone to use. However, implement such a change, establish a PMO office, and be able to implement all the standardized process would take at least 10 months to a year for the project managers to actually benefit from it. And from the project manager's perspective, they're already overloaded. This is something they have to put in actual work in right now, and they don't benefit for quite a while. So none of them are on board with this. They're not willing to support. And the management are currently occupied in org change project. So now Aaron is the one stand up and ask for help. What are some of your experience and best practice that you can advise for him to be able to proceed in such a change project or establishing a PMO office that's possibly leading to success? So I want to open up for open discussion. What are your knowledge or experience about best practice for project as such?
One thing that I would say about this first is, if this is all he understands about the problems that the existing management team is having, he doesn't know enough. Okay, he absolutely doesn't know why they're having problems. He doesn't know what the problems stem from. Is it because of how we do it, or is it more because we get so much of it that we can't do it? He'd also clearly, they figured out a way to produce and to get results. If that's not being analyzed to understand how they're currently succeeding anyway, they're missing a lot of valuable information. So, all of those things, then yes, maybe a PMO is a good idea, maybe. But there may be other things that are really the problems. And if you aren't talking to the people to find out what it is they're really challenged by, you're making too many assumptions.
Okay, so you're saying the why is missing, and he really need to go back and find out the why to be able to assess whether the solution he proposed is a valid solution.
Yes, and he needs to actively involve the people who would push it forward at that level, like the project managers who are really struggling with it. He needs to have them engaged in presenting the solution and their belief that it's the right solution. And if there's no conversation, if he's only talking to executives, it's never going to work.
Good point. Thank you. Any other thoughts? Anyone else?
My thought is, why is there so much change going on? Is this all necessary change, or is this like change that's happening because processes are broken, or why are they receiving hundreds of change requests a week? And that, I think that might tie in with what Arlene said, but it really is, I mean, if this amount of change is normal and expected as part of the process, then you would expect that you can, what are the commonalities in the change, and you have some sort of process for change built in so that it's not, reinventing the wheel every time. But the first question is, why are they receiving so many change requests? And to try and get that under control and have a way to prioritize those change requests so that they can be managed in a more scalable fashion.
Okay, thank you. I think you and Arlene are addressing similar points. Is really go back to understand the why and spend some time to dive into the root cause of having the symptoms. Anyone else has experienced a similar project?
This case study is almost like deja vu, because I remember almost an exact study like this, maybe 20, 30 years ago. And as I remember, the problem wasn't necessarily dealing with the change request. The problem was earlier of rushing through the first engineering design, and it was a poor design that then had to be changed later. But again, that is almost an exact duplicate of a case.
Yeah, Ross, so it could also be, because with tier one suppliers, particularly in this sort of area, the salespeople are selling bespoke systems, and usually very short notice from the OEMs, who really are still experimenting, and they want their changes made right at the very, very last minute nowadays. And so it is about really what is the root cause and what is the reality of what's going on. But I also worry that you've got a change process going on for the organization. And here they are in a situation which could go even worse, and they lose revenue, they lose credibility with the OEMs and so forth, that this is not such a priority for them. So I would even want to go back to that stage and say, what is it about this that it's not a priority for the senior management? Because if it's not a priority, no matter what you suggest, it's not going to happen.
Ross, you said it's a deja vu scenario. In your last experience, what happened there?
In this case, it wasn't anything I was involved with. It was a case that I remember reading about. I think it was in the automobile industry, but it was almost the exact same situation where they were being overwhelmed with change requests. And they were trying to solve the problem with the change requests, but the problem wasn't necessarily in handling change requests. The problem was why the change requests were coming up originally. But like I said, I was reading about this, and it was years ago, so I don't remember all the details.
Ivy, is it typical project? Each project's doing its own thing and they're not relating with each other. You've got here that they're attacking one problem at a time, they're creating their own templates and so forth. Is it a case of the project managers not working together as part of the interim solution?
Right, yes. In this department, Aaron told me that all the project managers actually work independently. They each take a number of the change requests coming up, and then they responsible for resolving them. So they're not work together as a team. They all work independently. That's why they started to find their own shortcut solutions just to be able to get to the finish line.
Yeah. I mean, in a perfect world, we need to go back to understanding everything. But if you've got an emergency situation, it's a bit like the pandemic, it calls for some immediate action. And so I would look at the current situation. What immediate action can we do now together in order to stabilize things, and then get into the main meat of what it is?
Thanks.
My experience in this situation, similar work, would be that they need to sit down and really talk and really understand the problem before they take any additional action, because they've already taken action that they clearly know has not been effective. So it's crazy to bull forward that way without clearly having a better understanding of whether they're looking at symptoms or the real problem. And the bottom line is you want to solve the real problem. Symptoms go away when the real problem's solved.
In my point of view, when I look at what Aaron already done with suggesting the PMO, I think he actually separates the project management and change management in this case. He only seeks solution from the project management perspective, that he thought PMO was a good option and pursuing the standardized process, etc. However, he's getting resistance because he's not taking care of the change management aspect and doing the appropriate actions that's supposed to be taken care of in advance, understanding the why and etc.
Yeah, there's been a lot of research on PMOs, and many companies now are going to CMOs, the sort of corporate management office, for projects which is involving change management in the same location, so that you can bring the two together. I mean, I've recently read about 300 papers on the subject, and PMOs are very much in vogue at the moment. They work in some cases, but not in all, and they are evolving. And so maybe that's why he's going down that route. But that's a sort of a mid to longer term solution. He's got a more urgent thing on at the moment.
Yeah, agreed. Thanks, Reg. Okay, for the interest of time, I suggest let's wrap up. So one way I want to look at project management and change management, I reference this dualism model in the book of I Ching. is project management, change management seemingly different. If you look at some of the characteristics, project management is very well documented, has very specific timeline, like the second example we looked at, 1 year, and has focused on technical process systems, and they focus on managing activities, versus change management doesn't have to have formal process and no necessarily concrete timeline, but focus on people and actually focus on manage the impact. And one way they're actually very complementary and interconnected and interrelated with each other based on our discussion is that project management can support change management if done right, with building the structure, provide a foundation, like in one of the examples, provide all the data and numbers and facts. While change management is really supporting project management for the people's feeling and get stakeholders buy-in of the solution that's actually being created and designed. So with that, I try to design this discussion a little bit different, evolve around a lot of different real life cases, short cases. I want to open up also for Dr. Ross and Reg. What's your guys' feedback regarding this style of the discussion? Any suggestions for me? Any of the feedback you have for the cases we selected?
I have really nothing to add other than it was a very interesting discussion, something I really haven't thought much about, and the way you put it together. I'm kind of like Reg, though, in that I see it really all at once, all together. And because it is all together, you can take different perspectives on how to view that collective, though, which I think you've done. I like the way you kind of separate some of it out, but again, it's looking at the same thing from two perspectives.
Thank you, Dr. Ross.
Ivy, thank you for really, from my point of view, a very interesting process. I liked it very, very much. It gave everybody an opportunity, which some have taken, to get engaged with the subject. I think it's a very important and relevant subject, this relationship between the two. I would even say, with what we discussed on a previous week with management consultants, all three, I think it's becoming more holistic nowadays and not so separate as it has in the past. It raises, I think your case from New York was very important because, as was said by, I think it was admin, I can't remember your name. You raised this issue about executive and also the discussion around leadership. And I think without the proper leadership, neither project management nor change management will succeed. And this is why the role of the leaders, the executives, however they're positioned in the organization, and the last case is another example of this, is crucial. So it's raised, I think, lots and lots of questions. We've had some interesting discussions around it. I liked it very, very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Reg. Any other inputs?
Can I make just one final comment in terms of the measure of success? For a project management piece, the measure of success is a little bit more simpler because you're just judged on, budget and time and, meeting the milestones. Whereas for a change, that's a very abstract, how do you define the success? You mentioned that, the change from 5% to 10% was considered a success, so why not go to 5 or why not go to less than that? So, and how do you go there? So that I find is still a little bit of a gray area.
Yes, agreed.
Can I just make a quick comment on that? Because I think one of the issues around project management and measuring success at the moment, and one of my students has had 2 papers published on this whole issue about, is it time now to move away from the iron triangle of project management and take in more of the people issues to see whether a project is actually successful or not? And I think that's a very important debate for the future, is the current PMI approach to managing project success really what we need today? And I think today's discussion has identified that it's got to go further. And that's why the CM amalgamation is so important.
It's a good point, Reg. From the project management perspective, there are different type of projects. Normally, we would measure based on KPIs such as timing, budget, resource, etc. But there's an agile project with not a very defined requirements, without very solid scope. Those are already being challenging to be measured in that case. And I think Gary said one thing stuck with me. He said, we don't measure success for change management, we monitor them. I thought that was a very good input he provided during that discussion.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Ivy, and thank you for everyone else for a very, very interesting discussion. I wish you all well, and we'll continue again on the Change Management Network for any other discussion to follow. You all have a good day. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Ivy. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.